From princess to last pharaoh, Cleopatra's true story. Learn English with real stories. A woman in gold, a snake in a basket, a kingdom on the edge of collapse, before the Roman Empire, before the Middle Ages, before most of the world as we know it today. There was a woman who ruled one of the greatest civilizations on earth. Let me ask you something. Can intelligence and ambition coexist with ruthless politics? When does fighting for survival become moral compromise? And here's the big one. Can a woman's legacy survive 2,000 years of male-dominated history? This is not just a story. It's a lesson about power, complexity, and human nature. It's a story that will challenge you, a story that will teach you real English, and a story that will make you think deeply. Her name was Cleopatra VII Philopator. Cleopatra means glory of the father in Greek. But she would create her own glory and become the most famous queen in history. She was born in Alexandria around 69 BC. She grew up with immense privilege, political intrigue, and the weight of a dying dynasty. She became a brilliant student, mastering languages and diplomacy. Then a co-ruler fighting for legitimacy. Later, a strategic ally of Rome's most powerful men. And finally, a tragic symbol of the ancient world's end and the complex relationship between intelligence, power, and survival. Chapter 1. Origins. The year was 69 AD. The Roman Republic was expanding its reach across the Mediterranean. In Alexandria, Egypt, the greatest library and center of learning in the ancient world, was slowly declining under the weight of political instability. Cleopatra VII was born into the Ptolemaic dynasty, descendants of Alexander the Great's General Ptolemy. For 3 centuries, the Ptolemies had ruled Egypt, but their power was waning as Rome grew stronger. The palace in Alexandria was a marvel of marble columns and golden statues. The air was sweet with incense and exotic spices from trade routes that connected Africa, Asia, and Europe. Scribes worked quietly in vast libraries, copying scrolls that contained humanity's greatest knowledge. Baby Cleopatra entered a world of luxury, but also of deadly family politics. The Ptolemies had a disturbing tradition of siblings murdering each other for the throne. Brothers killed brothers, sisters poisoned sisters. Survival required not just intelligence, but cunning. Her father, Ptolemy XIV, was known as Auletes, the flute player, because he loved music more than governing. He had been driven from Egypt multiple times and only maintained power through Roman support. His weakness made the kingdom vulnerable. Young Cleopatra was clearly different from her siblings. While her brothers played with toys, she studied with the greatest teachers in Alexandria. While other royal children spoke only Greek, Cleopatra learned Egyptian, becoming the first Ptolemaic ruler in 300 years to speak the language of her subjects. In English, we say someone is ahead of the game when they prepare for future challenges better than others. From childhood, Cleopatra was clearly ahead of the game, understanding that successful rulers must connect with their people. She mastered 9 languages: Egyptian, Greek, Latin, Hebrew, Arabic, Ethiopian, Median, Parthian, and Troglodyte. This linguistic ability allowed her to communicate directly with traders, diplomats, and common people throughout her diverse kingdom. The Library of Alexandria became her playground and classroom. She studied mathematics with Greek scholars, astronomy with Egyptian priests, and rhetoric with Roman tutors. Her mind absorbed knowledge like desert sand absorbs precious water. But book learning wasn't enough. Cleopatra watched her father's humiliating dependency on Rome and swore she would find a different path. Egypt would not become a mere Roman province while she lived. As she grew into adolescence, palace intrigue intensified. Courtiers whispered about succession. Which sibling would inherit the throne? How could Egypt maintain independence while Rome grew stronger? These questions would define Cleopatra's entire life and force her to make choices that would echo through history. Chapter 2. First Struggles. When Cleopatra was 18, her father died, leaving the throne to her and her 10-year-old brother Ptolemy XIII. According to Egyptian custom, they were supposed to marry and rule together as co-monarchs. The arrangement was a political fiction designed to maintain stability. In reality, Cleopatra was far more capable than her child brother, but advisors loyal to Ptolemy III saw an opportunity to control a weak king rather than serve a strong queen. Palace life became a delicate dance of survival. The throne room echoed with whispered conspiracies. Golden corridors that once felt safe now harbored potential assassins. Trust became a luxury Cleopatra couldn't afford. Her brother's advisors, led by the cunning eunuch Pothinus, began systematically undermining Cleopatra's authority. They convinced the young pharaoh that his sister threatened his rightful power. In English, we use the phrase, "the writing on the wall," when warning signs clearly indicate approaching danger. Cleopatra could definitely see the writing on the wall regarding her brother's intentions. The conflict reached a breaking point when civil war erupted between Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII. The queen was forced to flee Egypt with a small group of loyal supporters. For the first time in her life, she was truly powerless. Exiled in Syria, Cleopatra faced her darkest moment. She was only 21, alone in a foreign land, with no army and few allies. Most people would have accepted defeat and lived quietly in exile. But Cleopatra was not most people. She began gathering mercenaries and planning her return. If intellect and education weren't enough, she would learn to use every weapon available, including her wit, charm, and strategic alliances. Her opportunity came when Julius Caesar, Rome's most powerful general, arrived in Alexandria pursuing his rival Pompey in their own civil war. Caesar represented both danger and possibility. Let me ask you something. When facing impossible odds, would you risk everything on a single bold gamble? Would you trust your enemies to become your allies? Cleopatra was about to make a decision that would change her life forever and demonstrate the kind of calculated risk-taking that defined her reign. The young queen was preparing to stake everything on one brilliant, dangerous move. Chapter 3. The Turning Point. Caesar's arrival in Alexandria in 48 AD created the perfect storm Cleopatra needed. The Roman general was pursuing Pompey, but Ptolemy XIII's advisors had already killed Pompey, hoping to gain Caesar's favor. Instead, Caesar was disgusted by their treachery. Cleopatra saw her chance. She needed to meet Caesar, but the palace was controlled by her brother's forces. A direct approach would mean certain death. So she devised one of history's most famous gambits. Hidden inside a carpet, or laundry bundle according to some accounts, Cleopatra had herself smuggled into Caesar's private chambers. When the carpet was unrolled, out stepped the exiled queen of Egypt. Picture this moment. Caesar, the most powerful man in the world, suddenly face to face with a brilliant young woman who had risked everything for this single conversation. The air crackled with danger and possibility. Caesar was 52, war-weary and calculating. Cleopatra was 21, desperate but supremely confident. Their meeting would change the course of both their lives and the ancient world. Cleopatra didn't rely on beauty alone. She deployed her greatest weapons: intelligence, linguistic skill, and deep knowledge of politics and history. She spoke to Caesar in perfect Latin, discussing Roman law, Egyptian economics, and Mediterranean trade. The conversation lasted all night. By dawn, Caesar had decided to support Cleopatra's claim to the throne. The carpet gambit had worked perfectly. What followed was brutal and efficient. Caesar's Roman legions defeated Ptolemy III's forces in a series of battles. The young pharaoh drowned in the Nile, ending the civil war. Cleopatra was restored as Egypt's sole ruler. But victory came with a price. Cleopatra was now dependent on Roman military power, exactly what she had hoped to avoid. She had gained her throne by allying with the very force that threatened Egyptian independence. In English, we say someone made a deal with the devil when they accept help from dangerous allies to achieve their goals. Cleopatra's alliance with Caesar was definitely a deal with the devil, necessary for survival but potentially destructive in the long term. Caesar remained in Alexandria for months, longer than any Roman general had stayed in a foreign capital. Together, they sailed the Nile, visiting ancient temples and discussing philosophy, science, and governance. Cleopatra gave birth to a son, Caesarion, claiming Caesar was the father. Whether true or not, the claim strengthened her position and created a potential heir with both Egyptian and Roman legitimacy. But when Caesar was assassinated in Rome in 44 AD, Cleopatra found herself alone again, ruling a kingdom that depended on Roman protection without a Roman protector. The game was about to become far more dangerous. Chapter 4: Success and Impact. After Caesar's assassination, Cleopatra faced a crisis that would have destroyed a lesser ruler. Rome was in civil war, Egypt was vulnerable, and powerful enemies surrounded her on all sides. But Cleopatra had learned from her earlier struggles. She began playing a more sophisticated game, using every tool at her disposal to protect Egypt's independence and her own power. Her next strategic alliance was with Mark Antony, one of Rome's triumvirs who controlled the eastern Mediterranean. But Cleopatra approached this relationship differently than her partnership with Caesar. When Antony summoned her to meet him in Tarsus, Cleopatra arrived in a golden barge dressed as Aphrodite, goddess of love. The spectacle was designed to overwhelm Antony's senses and establish her as his equal, not his subordinate. Think about this transformation. The desperate exile who had once hidden in a carpet now commanded fleets and staged theatrical displays that became legendary. Cleopatra had mastered the art of political theater. Her relationship with Antony produced 3 children and a powerful political alliance. Together, they controlled much of the eastern Mediterranean, creating a semi-independent empire that challenged Rome's dominance. Cleopatra used this period to strengthen Egypt internally. She promoted trade, supported arts and sciences, and commissioned massive building projects. Alexandria flourished as a center of learning and commerce. She spoke directly to her subjects in Egyptian, making her genuinely popular among common people. Previous Ptolemaic rulers had been distant and foreign. Cleopatra presented herself as a true Egyptian pharaoh. Her economic policies were brilliant yet practical. Think of her as an ancient CEO. She controlled Egypt's grain exports like managing a global supply chain, and negotiated trade deals that made Egypt wealthy again. Egypt became wealthy again under her rule. But Cleopatra's greatest achievement was cultural. She positioned herself as the heir to both Egyptian pharaohs and Greek philosophers. She claimed divine status while demonstrating very human intelligence and political skill. In English, we say someone walked a tightrope when they successfully navigate a dangerous situation requiring perfect balance. Cleopatra was constantly walking a tightrope between Egyptian independence and Roman domination. Her success created powerful enemies, especially Octavian, later Augustus, Caesar's adopted heir who saw Cleopatra and Antony as threats to his vision of Roman dominance. The final confrontation was inevitable. 2 visions of the Mediterranean world would clash. Octavian's unified Roman Empire versus Cleopatra and Antony's multicultural alliance. Everything Cleopatra had built would soon be tested in the ultimate battle for survival. Chapter 5: Conflict and Pain. The war between Octavian and the alliance of Cleopatra and Antony was not just a military conflict, but a propaganda battle that would shape how history remembered both sides. Octavian portrayed Cleopatra as a foreign seductress who had corrupted noble Romans. Roman propaganda painted her as a dangerous temptress using magic and sexuality to destroy Roman virtue. These lies would persist for centuries. The truth was more complex. Cleopatra was a brilliant politician fighting to preserve her kingdom's independence. Her relationships with Caesar and Antony were strategic alliances, not romantic infatuations. The decisive battle came at Actium in 31 AD. Cleopatra and Antony's combined forces faced Octavian's fleet in a naval engagement that would determine the fate of the ancient world. The battle was fierce and chaotic. Ships rammed into each other while archers exchanged volleys across blood-stained waters. The air filled with smoke from burning vessels and the screams of dying sailors. When the tide turned against them, Cleopatra made a controversial decision. She ordered her ships to withdraw from the battle, saving her fleet but abandoning Antony's forces. Historians still debate whether this was cowardice or strategic wisdom. Antony followed Cleopatra's retreat, effectively surrendering the battle and his political future. Their alliance was broken, their dreams of an independent Eastern empire destroyed. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Octavian pursued the defeated leaders to Alexandria. Antony, believing false reports of Cleopatra's death, committed suicide by falling on his sword. Cleopatra was captured but refused to submit to Roman humiliation. She would not be paraded through Rome as a captive queen for Octavian's triumph. On August 30th, 30 AD, Cleopatra committed suicide. Ancient sources suggest she used a venomous snake, asp, though modern historians debate the exact method. She was 39 years old. Her death marked the end of Ptolemaic rule and Egypt's independence. The kingdom that had existed for 3,000 years became a Roman province. The ancient world was ending, the Roman Empire was beginning. But even in death, Cleopatra controlled her narrative. She chose dignity over survival, ensuring she would be remembered as a queen, not a slave. In English, we say someone went out with a bang when they end something dramatically rather than quietly. Cleopatra definitely went out with a bang, creating a legend that would outlive the Roman Empire itself. Conclusion: legacy and reflection. Today, August 30th, marks the anniversary of Cleopatra's death, but her influence extends far beyond that tragic date. She remains one of history's most recognizable figures, though often for the wrong reasons. Cleopatra's life teaches us that leadership requires both intelligence and compromise. She was undoubtedly brilliant, a polyglot scholar who successfully ruled one of the ancient world's great kingdoms for nearly 2 decades. Her story shows us the complexity of historical judgment. Roman propaganda portrayed her as a dangerous seductress, but evidence suggests she was a capable ruler fighting impossible odds to preserve her kingdom's independence. She demonstrated that survival sometimes requires morally ambiguous choices. Cleopatra ordered the deaths of rivals, including her own siblings, yet also protected Egypt from conquest longer than anyone thought possible. Her use of strategic relationships with Caesar and Antony was controversial but practical. In a world where women rarely held independent power, she found ways to leverage male authority while maintaining her own agency. Cleopatra proved that cultural intelligence matters as much as political power. By learning Egyptian and connecting with her subjects, she achieved genuine popularity that previous Ptolemaic rulers never enjoyed. Most importantly, her legacy reminds us that history is written by the winners. For centuries, Roman accounts defined how we understood Cleopatra. Only recently have scholars begun separating the historical woman from the mythological figure. Her life raises eternal questions about leadership and morality. Can good ends justify questionable means? How do we balance personal survival against moral principles? When does strategic thinking become manipulation? These questions remain relevant because power dynamics haven't fundamentally changed. Modern leaders still face choices between compromise and principle, between survival and integrity. Now it's your turn. How do you navigate situations where your survival conflicts with your values? When faced with impossible odds, what risks would you take? How important is it to control your own narrative? Keep learning from complex historical figures who faced impossible choices. Keep believing that intelligence and determination can overcome tremendous obstacles. Keep growing in your understanding of leadership's moral complexities. And remember, you're not just learning English through these stories. You're discovering that real leadership requires navigating moral complexity while staying true to your deepest values. If Cleopatra's story made you see the world, and yourself, differently, then this channel is your new home. Subscribe, and let's grow together through stories that matter. We have many more real stories to help you become a confident English speaker. See you next time.